Elsewhere in the ACC, number 3, North Carolina goes on the road to take on Florida State. 2 p.m. tip-off Saturday, this one on ESPN. Haslametrics makes Carolina about a 9.5-point favorite on the road, total close to 149. Eli, you're still a little bit lower than the AP poll in North Carolina at number 7. Florida State, obviously unranked both by you and the AP poll. So, I mean, it's not like you're killing North Carolina here. You still have them as number 7 versus number 3 in the AP poll, but perhaps give us some insight here about why you're maybe a little more bearish than the AP.
Yeah, like you said, still a top 10 power rated team for me, but when you're allowing ACC opponents to shoot 22.5% from 3, and it's the biggest difference, by the way, this per John Gassaway. Really, really great college basketball writer, especially when it comes to analytics. Biggest difference from a conference average, and keep in mind the ACC average is 35% in the last 5 seasons. So UNC forces you, as in the opponent, into a lot of isolation sets. That's where I'll give them credit defensively, and they are much more in tune defensively than even the runner-up team was going back to a couple of years ago when underperformed in the regular season and greatly outperformed expectations in the NCAA tournament and got lucky, for that matter, with their opponent's three-point shooting. But back to my point, can Florida State take advantage of that? Can you exploit UNC from 3? Because just like Auburn, UNC is going to be had eventually from behind the arc, whether it's a large sample size or even just in a one-game short sample. And Florida State got right from 3. You hit on, can Clemson get right from 3 against Duke or continue to? Well, Florida State continued to get right from 3. They got right against your Orange going back to midweek, 12 of 28 from behind the arc at Syracuse. And they shot 35%, or I should say Florida State shot 12 of 28 against UNC going back to their early season ACC matchup where Florida State lost by 8 at the Dean Dome. And Florida State shot 35% from 3 in a 16-point win against Syracuse in their most recent ACC matchup. So that's something to keep in mind because Florida State does have perimeter floor spacing, especially Darren Green, the UCF transfer going back to a couple of years ago, one of the best perimeter floor spacers, especially off ball screen action. And that's where you can attack North Carolina in ball screen coverage with Armando Bacot. And Green is one of the most lethal three-point shooters, one of the most underrated marksmen in the country. So I think Florida State can have an advantage just like they did when they covered a pretty big number at North Carolina and they got hot from 3 in early December. So pretty good spot here to fade the Tar Heels to me.
I'm going to push back on you a little bit and challenge you and ask for your response to it. You're mentioning that you expect North Carolina's 3-point field goal defense to regress at some point. And I will just ask, why are you so sure about that? Because if we look at shot quality, Carolina's number 13 in shot quality defense. That implies that they are a legitimate elite defense in college basketball, that it's not just, poor shooting by their opponents. They are number 1 in 3-point field goal percentage allowed versus the average opponent. Florida State, perhaps you're forecasting some positive regression here, but overall on the season, they don't take many threes. They're 323rd in the country in 3-point attempt rate and barely above the top 200 in 3-point percentage versus the average opponent by Haslametrics. So I guess I'll just ask, what makes you so sure that what we're seeing from North Carolina is a complete outlier and won't just, even if it regresses a little bit, it's still a really good perimeter defense, it seems to me.
Right, and that's because they force you into isolation. So you look back at that Wake Forest win at the Dean Dome, tough place to play, but Wake Forest, Market was on Wake Forest, on the Demon Deacs in that game. I think they closed around 7.5-point road dogs, but a lot of isolation threes, a lot of tough, difficult, contested shots. So was that the right matchup to back Wake Forest? Maybe not. Maybe they got a little unlucky with some of their open threes, but Florida State, schematically, I give Leonard Hamilton credit. I don't know how he's still coaching. He looks like he's 50 years old, even though I think he's in his mid-70s. But Florida State took 28 threes at the Dean Dome last time these teams played. And like I touched on, shot above 40%. So he adjusted schematically for a Florida State team, to your point, that doesn't take a lot of threes, bottom 60 in 3-point scoring rate in the country offensively. So I challenge you back that Florida State will adjust and they will take threes unless Leonard Hamilton is napping during the game.
Fair enough. Yeah, Leonard Hamilton. I hope I look that good when I'm in my mid 70s, and I can already tell you I'm minus 1,000 not to look that good when I'm in my mid 70s. So, hey, I give you credit. You're right. He had an opponent specific game plan for that matchup against North Carolina the last time. So, fair points there for sure. And I mean, certainly never excited to lay this many points on the road, close to double digits with anybody at this point, this time of the year. And we know that, perhaps this Florida State team isn't as talented as some of the ones we've seen in recent years, but we both would agree that they are certainly well coached. Last note here before we get to our surprise market that I can't wait to get Eli's reaction to here. Is the Wooden Award already decided with Zach Edey at this point? He's anywhere between minus 750 to minus 1,000. And I ask that here when we're talking about North Carolina, because if there is at least one person who I think might be able to pull the upset, it's RJ Davis of North Carolina. He has been phenomenal. In my opinion, the best guard in the country. He's anywhere between 20 and 25 to 1 after being 50 to 1 a couple of weeks ago. Do you agree with me if somehow Edey were to lose or to have an injury, that RJ Davis is next in line, A, and B, is it already wrapped up for Edey? If he stays
I think it's wrapped up. I thought it's funny because I thought that was going to be the surprise market that you had for me. So Now I'm really intrigued as to what that is. But you look at KenPom Player of the Year standings, Edey number 1, then Deron Holmes. Dayton has really, really taken a step in A10 play, and I'm excited to watch this team in the dance because we didn't get to see that Obi Toppin Dayton team, even though I thought they were a little bit of a paper tiger going back to the COVID year. But Deron Holmes, one of the best bigs in college basketball, and under discussed. We haven't talked about him on the podcast since we started doing this going back to a few weeks ago. So he's definitely in the running. Now, definitely not from a market perspective. And what are Holmes's odds at, by the way?
Holmes is at, I'm still searching right now. So keep talking filibuster for me and I'll try and find him.
Filipowski, I know, is right there with Edey, or maybe not from an implied probability standpoint, but definitely in the race. When it comes to the guys near Edey or closest to catching Edey, he's third in KenPom's Player of the Year standings. Then Janai Broom for our Auburn Tigers, Jaden Ledee for San Diego State, who's made a big leap after getting a ton of front court minutes, playing the backup role on last year's runner-up team. Jamal Shed for Houston, and then it's RJ Davis. So from a blue blood, like this is the best player on a top 5 AP top 25 team. RJ Davis is in the running, but I don't know if the market will all of a sudden fall in love with RJ Davis. A, because unless Edey gets hurt, I just don't see that in the realm of possibility. So long story short, I think it's wrapped up. And when you look at metrics wise, Davis isn't even in the top 5.
So Holmes is not listed at most sports books, but he is listed at DraftKings at 60 to 1 to answer your question for the Dayton Star.
Yeah, so I'm not even saying to throw a dart on him. My point was just he's been one of the most underrated, if you don't even want to talk about winning the Wooden Award, but one of the most impactful players in college basketball, which is what the Wooden Award is meant for, unless it's 80-year-olds like Leonard Hamilton voting for the award and they vote for RJ Davis.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about it because, I mean, obviously most people presume it'll be Edey again, but I just wonder, if there might be some voter fatigue when it comes to him. That's really the biggest reason I ask. And it's always hard to try and determine that, but, we do see that with awards sometimes, that there might be some fatigue with a certain player.
Yeah, but he's made a step to that point, and I brought this up a few, maybe even in non-conference play when I was doing outside shots, that Edey has been elite and much, much, much improved when it comes to passing out of doubles, which may seem easy to you, you, the listener, you, the viewer, especially when you're talking about a 7'4" big that gets doubled and Purdue has outside shooting. But he has been much more willing to pass the ball to the perimeter, and Purdue has cashed in a lot more. So it helps his assist numbers, but it also makes him a more well-rounded player when you look at efficiency and the kind of impact he makes on this Purdue team and also just individually across college basketball. So I don't think there will be voter fatigue. It's not like he's taken a step back in any regard, like we saw Oscar Tshiebwe do last year, and he wasn't even in the Wooden Award conversation when you look back to last year's Kentucky team.